Science,
engineering,
medicine, chemistry,
physics,
biology, humanities, cardiology,
computing, public health, global
aeronautics, science communication.
Hello everyone, I'm Gareth Mitchell. Today, is the corporate world diverse enough, especially when it comes to women? Why not find out from a leading woman in business? And that's what we've done as one of KPMG's top people gives a talk at Imperial.
I think the corporate world is and will continue to look at diversity in a completely different way than it has historically. Diversity is actually all about making the best of the people in that organisation. It's not about diversity for its own sake.
And we're talking headaches today, a common problem for many of us and positively debilitating to those who suffer from migraine. But why do we know so little about the problem?
Headaches are probably one of the oldest described disorders, but we still don't know what is really causing the attack, why 15% of the population suffers while the rest doesn't suffer.
And we have the Imperial student who's been to prison, albeit as part of our Charity Insights programme, I might add.
The Imperial College Podcast.
Well, first up, let's have some news from around the college. Sam Wong is here as well from our Communications and Development Division. How are you, Sam?
I'm very well, how are you?
Indeed, I'm very well, full of the joys of not quite spring after an enjoyable Easter break. And I'll tell you, Sam, one thing that has been exciting me, coming back onto campus straight after Easter, I was walking through the big business school entrance, the main reception here into the college, with this fabulous exhibition taking shape, which is now up and running, isn't it?
Yeah, so this is the Strictly Science exhibition, which is there to mark the centenary of the Medical Research Council, which has funded a lot of research at Imperial and all over the country over the last 100 years, including some of the most important scientific breakthroughs that have really revolutionised medical science.
Absolutely. And that Strictly Science exhibition is on at the moment. As you listen to this podcast, dear listener, the exhibition is actually going to be running until the 14th of April. People are already saying some awesome things. So that's running until the 14th of April. All right, so Sam, in other news, and in fact still MRC related because they funded some of the research that you're about to talk about, we're looking into bird flu now, aren't we?
Yep, this is a study funded by the MRC and the Wellcome Trust, and it's by Professor Wendy Barclay in the Department of Medicine, and they've been looking at genetic changes that would enable the H5N1 bird flu virus to replicate more easily in the noses of mammals.
How does that build on work that we've already seen in recent years into bird flu?
So you may remember that last year we spoke to Wendy actually about these controversial studies that were going on in the US and in the Netherlands, where researchers had engineered the bird flu virus so that it was able to transmit between ferrets. And ferrets are used a lot in flu research because they're susceptible to the same viruses as humans, so we use them as a kind of a surrogate for studying flu infection in humans. So there was a lot of controversy around these studies and about whether they should be published because they were creating these dangerous strains of bird flu which could cause severe disease and spread between people and cause a pandemic. But eventually the research was published, and the study that we're talking about now is really addressing the same kind of question, although Wendy's approach was slightly different. She was using weakened viruses that can't cause severe illness, but we can still study them to look at how well they can replicate in the nose.
And is the idea that we kind of lead up to a vaccine then that might stop future pandemics in their tracks?
That's one of the outcomes of this research, yes. So partly we were just interested in what are the mutations that would enable the bird flu virus in the wild to spread between people and cause a pandemic. But also it could have this application in vaccines, because if a pandemic does happen of bird flu, then we would want to give people live vaccines, because you can manufacture many more doses of those types of vaccines than the killed virus vaccines that we use for seasonal flu. And we need these live vaccines to be able to replicate in the nose. They think that previous vaccines against bird flu maybe weren't very successful because they weren't able to do that. So this study, by telling us about whether the virus can replicate in the nose and therefore transmit between ferrets or people, also tells us about what we would need to design in a vaccine to make it effective against bird flu that was able to transmit between people.
Great. All right, Sam, thank you very much indeed for that. Simon Levy is also here. Hello to you, Simon. I hope you had a good Easter.
Hello, Gareth. Very good, thank you, yes.
Catching up on a few bits and pieces of news, including, of course, one of the bigger announcements of the year happened pretty soon after we put this podcast to bed last time, wasn't it?
Yes, as we were recording that, scientists from CERN announced that they'd been crunching just some more data from the Large Hadron Collider, and they had some more exciting news about the particle they discovered at the end of last year. And this time, they're pretty much happy to say that it is a Higgs boson.
Right, so they're not saying it's a Higgs-like particle anymore. They are saying this is the one.
They're saying this is the one. The only thing they've got to do next year, they're going to be firing up the machine one more time at 10 times the power, and they're going to be looking to see if it's the only one.
And one of the scientists making all those exciting announcements over at CERN was, of course, our very own Tajinder Jim Verdi here at Physics at Imperial. And pretty much the week after that, he was on a plane down to Uganda, down to the capital, Kampala. I was there as well, because another hat that I wear, one of my many hats, is working with the BBC on their science programmes. And the BBC hosted a science festival called Science Africa, and it co-hosted this with Makerere University in Kampala, and we invited top scientists from around the world and indeed around Africa to discuss science and talk about it in front of a large audience of students and school children and scientists over there at Makerere. It was a real opportunity to talk about what's going on, what's the latest in science, and actually in its own way a nice opportunity to highlight a lot of the work that we do here at Imperial.
And if our listeners wanted to read more about Jim Verdi and his jet setting, I managed to interview him for the latest issue of Imperial magazine, and you can find that interview on our website under CERN Courier.
So, in other news then, Simon, some results from Planck staring back into the early moments of the universe. Tell me more.
Well, just before Easter, the European Space Agency released some fantastic new pictures from their Planck satellite, which scientists from Imperial's Department of Physics have been involved in. The Planck satellite has been surveying the cosmic microwave background, which is radiation left over from the Big Bang when the universe first started. And the satellite has just finished compiling the entire sky's worth of data for this.
And what did it reveal?
One of the big things it revealed is that the universe is 13.82 billion years old. And interestingly for the scientists, they think this is 50 million years older than anything that they've previously seen in surveys of the sky like this before.
And it's stunning that they can say that to such a high degree of accuracy. You know, when you think that it sounds like a long time, but only 65 million years ago that we had dinosaurs roaming around on the Earth. You know, we're not talking about a really long span of time, especially not in terms of the age of the universe.
Well, and this is all down to the super high resolution of the image that the Planck satellite has turned up. I mean, if you can imagine, it's a bit like the difference between when you took a picture on your camera phone 5 years ago and it all looked a bit sort of dotty and grainy. And if you imagine what you take a picture like now, that's much higher resolution. So it gives scientists a much better idea of what the conditions were really like in the universe back then.
And of course, it's all very well us describing the image here on the radio, on the podcast. But if people want to see it, how can they?
People can see the pictures by going to our website, and you can sort of find out more about it. You can follow the links to the European Space Agency. And we've also interviewed the two leading scientists from Imperial, Professor Andrew Jaffe and Dave Clements, on this podcast before. There are links to there from our page as well.
And those pages, by the way, are at imperial.ac.uk/news. And remember, these are newly designed news pages, well worth checking out. And of course, now you have the opportunity to leave comments as well. And we really want to get a conversation going around this and the other stories on the website. So check those out. Simon, thank you very much indeed for that. Let's talk about diversity in the corporate world now, especially when it comes to women in the boardroom and indeed throughout enterprise. That is just what they have been talking about recently in the Imperial College Business School. As part of the Imperial Business Insight series, Marianne Fallon, Head of Corporate Affairs at KPMG, has been here to give a talk on diversity and whether it'll be an issue or an opportunity in the year 2025. Well, just before her lecture, our very own Maxine Myers caught up with Marianne and Professor Dorothy Griffiths, who is Dean of the Business School. The first question to Marianne Fallon, though, was just how much of an issue is diversity in the world of business?
I think the corporate world is and will continue to look at diversity in a completely different way than it has historically. Diversity is actually all about making the best of the people in that organisation. It's not about diversity for its own sake.
Research released by the BBC last year stated that women are most strongly represented in education, where they make up 37% of head teachers, and in public appointments, where they account for 36%. Do you think other sectors could learn something from us in terms of some of the initiatives here at Imperial?
Well, I think the initiative that you were referring to, which is our Elsie Widdowson Fellowships, doesn't really work so well for other sectors. These are fellowships that we give to academic women when they return to work from maternity, and we give them a year to concentrate on their research with no other duties such as teaching and admin. So it's a very, very special scheme, and I don't think it would work so well in many other sectors. I think in the corporate world, roles are broader, and therefore you need a different kind of support.
In what ways do businesses benefit from having greater diversity?
I think there's a number of ways. Research has shown that actually greater diversity around the boardroom table, for example, in relation to gender balance, directly falls through to better return for shareholders, a more profitable, more successful organisation. We say variety is the spice of life. I think what we mean by that is variety breeds success, and that for me is why diversity is just so fundamental to getting it right.
Fewer than a third of the UK's most influential jobs are held by women. Do you think that because of this, women will turn it to entrepreneurship due to the lack of opportunities in the corporate world?
Well, I think opportunities in the corporate world are increasing. So I think we have to be very careful about seeing the corporate world as a closed world. That said, entering entrepreneurial activity, I think that it is these days much easier to attempt to become an entrepreneur, and I think women will therefore be attracted to it, but I don't think they'll be attracted to it simply because of challenges in the corporate world, because I think the corporate world is changing.
The UK government has told FTSE 100 companies to have a minimum of 25% of female directors by 2015. Do you think this is an achievable target?
I think this is a rather difficult question, because I think we have to be very, very careful about anything that smacks of targets that need to be imposed, because that generates the most terrible backlash. So I think the thing to say to companies is that you should have appointable women on all of your shortlists for directorships, and then select the best candidate. A woman should be there because she's the best candidate and not because of her gender. And I think the idea that one would be somewhere because of one's gender is so offensive, and it creates a terrible backlash from male colleagues. So I think they need to look harder, and we end up with what we end up with in terms of numbers.
Obviously, a topic that's been in the news recently is Yahoo's CEO, Melissa Mayer, will basically call her workers back, and the option of working from home will no longer be available, which could impact on women. What impact do you think this will have?
I think it's a very strange decision to have made. I understand some of the sentiment behind it. So, of course, working from home, technology allows us to do that more easily and more effectively than ever before. But for me, there is a piece around, well-functioning organisations need well-functioning teams, and ultimately we're human beings. There is no, certainly at this stage in technology's evolution, there is no real substitute for spending time together. Working from home stifles that to an extent. So I think Marissa Myers has got some sound reasons for her decision. I think for me the fundamental is that it is actually really shouting that she doesn't trust her workforce. I would be surprised if we saw whole-scale endorsement and other CEOs following suit.
My final question to you, Dot, is obviously here at Imperial College Business School we want to help prepare our students for work life in terms of working. How do you think our Masters and PhDs help prepare female students for life in the corporate world?
What I think we do is I think we provide all of our students with a really good education. I think we can provide some role models for our female students. I mean, there are lots of role models already available for the male students. And I think we can make them believe in themselves by making them believe, as we do, that they are the smartest, most talented young women around. So I hope we do that.
Dr. Griffiths talking there to Maxine Myers. We also heard from Marion Fallon of KPMG. And there's an extended version of Maxine's interview on our news website. Well, Sam is still here. And Sam, we're going to talk now about a health problem that many of us, I suppose, have experienced at some point. We're talking headaches and some research in that area that's going on here at Imperial College. So tell me more.
Yeah, so I was very interested when I heard about a researcher at Imperial called Dr. Anna Andreou, and she's a headache research fellow. She does all kinds of research into this area.
Yeah, and she's in the Faculty of Medicine, and she's recently been talking to MPs about all this as well, hasn't she?
That's right. There's an all-party parliamentary group on primary headache disorders, and she was invited as one of the few headache researchers in the UK to go and talk to them about headache research and how we can encourage more research into headaches and new treatments.
OK, well, let's hear your interview. And in fact, when you sat down and spoke to Anna, she started by describing the difference between a so-called kind of common headache and a migraine.
I focus on primary headaches, which is a group of headaches that involves tension-type headache, migraine, cluster headache. All of these different from each other. The most common of which, and I guess this is what you mean by common headache, is the tension-type headache. It affects far more people compared to migraine. It can affect up to 40% of the population. And basically the feeling is just a constant pressure on the forehead most of the time. But it's not associated with any other sensory disturbances. For example, the patient doesn't feel sensitivity to light or sensitivity to sound or nausea or problems with having to do any type of exercise. But migraine is associated with all of these symptoms. So the patient is very disabled, they can't be in a light place, they don't like sounds, they do feel nausea, and usually they are affected by any type of exercise. Even walking up the stairs, it can be painful.
And how much do we know about what causes migraines?
We don't know much, unfortunately. Headaches are probably one of the oldest described disorders in the world, but unfortunately we don't know much about them. Over the last decade, maybe over the last 15 years, there is a lot of advancement in our understanding of the disorder, but we still don't know what is really triggering the attack, what is really causing the attack, why 15% of the population suffers while the rest doesn't suffer.
Your research partly has been focused on an area of the brain called the hypothalamus. What makes you think that might be important, and what have you managed to find out about how it's involved?
Well, until recently, we thought that the hypothalamus might be involved in the initial stage of a migraine attack. When it comes to migraine attacks, the attack doesn't start during the aura or during the head pain phase. It actually starts before that. It starts during what we call the premonitory phase. During this premonitory phase, patients get the feeling that an attack is coming, or their environment understands that something is changing. Maybe their mood changes, they do feel an increased craving, for example, or thirst or yawning, and all of these are symptoms that highlighted that this may have to do with the hypothalamus. But it was only until very recently that we managed to show that during this premonitory phase, in migraine-induced attacks in patients, we can actually see hypothalamic activation. Obviously, following the development of the attack, what we see is a consistent thalamic activation and activation in some brainstem areas, which we cannot really identify with using the PET scan, for example. But the question that really bothers me is in which way the hypothalamus may be activated, and how does hypothalamic activation leads to thalamic activation and brainstem activation.
So for doctors who don't have their patients in a brain scanner, it must be very difficult for them to diagnose what's going on in a patient. In your research, are you working on other ways to improve the way that we can diagnose headaches?
We're trying to put together now an effort with different of headache clinics in UK to search for biomarkers. The idea is to search in blood or urine, easy samples that we can take from patients, and investigate whether there is any marker that is increased or decreased, or something changes during a migraine attack, or even outside a migraine attack, because this is the challenge as well. Outside a migraine attack, the patient may appear normal. So we need to really separate any markers that appear normal or abnormal before the attack and after the attack.
What do you think is the future of treatment for headaches and migraines? How is that going to change?
This is a difficult question. There are new developments coming up, especially with neurostimulation. Transcranial magnetic stimulation is a technique used over many years in a neurological setting. A company managed to develop a portable TMS device, so the patient can actually take this device at home, treat themselves as soon as they have the migraine attack. The trial was initially done with migraine with aura patients, and so the patient had to give a single pulse as soon as the aura started. And it was quite nice to show that a single pulse of transcranial magnetic stimulation can block the development of a migraine attack in these patients. This device is now in the market in UK as well, and post-market analysis also demonstrates that it may have an effect in migraine with aura patients. And now there are reports suggesting that vagus nerve stimulation can be also a treatment. So these are alternative treatments for migraine for those patients who have no pain relief from the traditional, let's say, migraine treatments. So hopefully, if we identify biomarkers, we might actually be able to personalize the treatment.
That's Anna Andreou, who's been speaking there to Sam Wong. Thank you very much to Sam for that. Well, let's say hello now to Lucy Handford. Hello, Lucy, how are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Yeah.
You've been investigating how Imperial students are getting the opportunity to experience a bit of life outside the university here, then, haven't you?
Yeah, that's right. There's a scheme called Charity Insights, and it gives Imperial students the opportunity to work at a charity for a few weeks over the summer and really make a difference there, and also get something out of the experience for themselves.
And you've been focusing on one student in particular, haven't you?
Yes, so the scheme Charity Insights, it piloted last summer, and Peter Quick, who's studying physics at Imperial, he worked at St Giles last summer, which is a charity that supports and helps rehabilitate people that have been in prison. So when they leave prison, that they're supported and able to reintegrate back into the community.
And so this was a real opportunity to go from his studies here at Imperial to looking at rehabilitation programmes and what happens to prisoners after a stretch inside. What did he have to say about the experience?
Well, he mainly worked in the office, so he wasn't working in a prison. He was given an awful lot of responsibility, actually. The chief executive asked him to look at the possibility of them merging with another organisation. He had entire responsibility for looking at the viability of that, something he'd never done before. And so it's great for him to really get stuck into that. But he also visited a couple of prisons as well, which really gave him an insight, as the name of the programme suggests, to see what it was like there and the difference that charity was making to people that use their services.
Yeah, well, you'll be glad to hear I've never been to a prison myself. I mean, I'm always fascinated by what it must be like to go into one. Let's hear a little bit about what Peter had to say about that aspect of the experience.
It was a very interesting experience. It's quite hard to describe what it's like. I actually went to 2 prisons and had a very different experience in both of them. Part of what St Giles does is they train people to give them an NVQ level 3 in advice and guidance, and while they're still serving time in the prison, basically then provide housing advice, job-seeking advice to other people in the prison system, so they're not so alone and lost when they get out. It was great to see the positive impact that St Giles was doing. And I also went to visit Wandsworth Prison, which is the biggest prison in Western Europe, and that was a very different experience. I also met some of the peer advisors there. That was a much shorter visit. I just met some of the people there, met some of the caseworkers there who supervise the peer advisors, and that was quite a scary place. It's very Victorian, big landings and lots of netting and stuff. It's not a very nice place.
Got some fascinating insights from Peter Quick there. Lucy, what else do you think that he got out of this experience?
Well, Peter is studying physics, and I asked him, how did you use your studies at St Giles? Because I think most people would think, well, how would you use physics at a charity? But actually, he did say that it came in very handy in terms of some of the work that he was given, and he gave a few examples.
I ended up doing quite a lot of help with the accounts, and so I think a general fluency with numbers was quite useful there. I ended up making a lot of Excel sheets. I actually managed to make one which would auto-populate, which saved a lot of time. Also, we learned a lot to kind of summarise and pick out the most salient points in the degree, and I think that was really useful because people don't want to read waffle really in a report. So it's a good technique to be able to kind of summarise actually what what is important, what's not important. I mean, I never did any physics, but I think there's lots of transferable skills that come from any degree, and you'll find your niche and find where they fit in with the organisation.
Well, clearly Peter got a lot out of doing that. Lucy, if people want to have a go applying for this year's round, is that possible? Is the scheme open?
Yes, it is open, and it's open until May. So any students that are interested, you need to be at Imperial the following year in order to qualify. So that's undergraduate and PhD students. To find out more, just have a look at the Careers Advisory Service section of the website.
And so finally then, just coming back to Peter Quick, did anything especially surprise him?
Well, I think what surprised him was that charities have to be quite tough, actually. Working in that environment, he saw firsthand how complex that was and how they had to be incredibly resourceful in order to survive.
I think I got a very interesting insight into how hard it is for a charity to function. You're always fighting for funding. The funding is mainly statutory. There's a lot of hoops that have to be jumped through and making quite tough decisions, actually. The charity sector is not a wishy-washy sector. You have to be really hard-headed to survive there. And that's, I think, that's why charities can't go under quite often, because they don't have, sometimes it's very hard to make those kinds of decisions. And I think that was my main impression, was how incredibly complicated it is to run a charity effectively.
Peter Quick there, who's been talking about that Charity Insights scheme via the Careers Advisory Service here at Imperial. And that pretty much wraps it up for today. Just before I go, though, I know that I've already mentioned our news website, but whilst we're at it, then do check out our media website as well for even more audio and video. The address is imperial.ac.uk/imedia. You can follow us on Twitter as well. @ImperialSpark is the place to find us in the Twitter sphere. Well, I'm Gareth Mitchell. I'll have more for you next time, but until then, thank you very much indeed for listening, and bye for now.